Afternoon. Welcome to the Overby Center for Southern Journalism and Politics. The program today is on Sri Lanka. And some of you are saying, what? How many of you know where Sri Lanka is? Raise your hands. Oh, you're lying. Do you really? Really? That's great. Do you know why it's important? Which is why we went. Because we wouldn't go anywhere that wasn't important, right? What happened was that Dean Norton went to Sri Lanka on an academic mission and became enamored with what's going on there. And he thought that we should put together a reporting trip, go to Sri Lanka, do a magazine, website, videos, the whole smear. So that's what we did. And you'll see those magazines hopefully in December or January, and we're going to give you some previews of them a little later. But first, let me just tell you why Sri Lanka is important. In a world in which democracy seems to be under fire and at the very least, under stress from nationalism movements and other movements across the globe, particularly in North America and in Europe, here is that rarest of things, an emerging democracy, a new democracy. Because what they're trying to put together in Sri Lanka is a pure parliamentary democracy. And they're doing it against a strong nationalist movement in that country. So it's very interesting, and it comes on the heels of a 30-year civil war. Hey, our civil war only lasted 5 years. This one lasted, can you imagine, 30 years on this island off the coast of India. And it killed over 100,000 people. It's pretty bad, it's pretty bloody. That doesn't include all the injuries and things that went on for years from the landmines and everything else that didn't get completely dug up. As you can imagine, well, let me tell you who the Civil War was between. It was basically a religion and ethnic civil war. You have Buddhists. 80% of the population of Sri Lanka is Buddhist. The next largest percentage is Hindu. They're about 13%. And those two groups have been duking it out for years and years and years and years. The Buddhists are primarily Sinhalese. The Hindus are Tamils, came originally from India. They got into this bloody battle that just wouldn't end. It's over now, mainly because the former almost dictator, we'll call him an autocrat, he kept doing things that would consolidate power around him and no one else. But he got cocky. And when he ran for re-election, he didn't have to. He could have put it off longer and longer under the then Constitution as he had it written. Instead, he went to the voters, and the voters kicked him out. And they elected a reform candidate who vowed to heal the wounds from the Civil War and to take the country toward a democracy. So that's going on now. It's a fairly extraordinary thing that's happening in Sri Lanka. So we went to Sri Lanka to see for ourselves, and what we found was this place of extraordinary beauty. I mean, amazing beaches, amazing diversity in the countryside in both the people and the scenery. Animals you'll find nowhere else in the world. Plants you'll find nowhere else in the world. They call this place, the Sri Lankans do, the Garden of Eden. And it is absolutely beautiful. From the terraced tea plantations, this lush green mountainsides up in the Central Highlands, down to these beautiful white sand beaches. It's an absolutely beautiful country. The people are extraordinarily friendly when they're not talking politics, and they get along when they're not talking politics. These students went all over the island, from Colombo, the very urban, sophisticated capital, where you see all these modern buildings, and then you'll see a train with people holding on to the train on the outside because there are too many people to get inside and take the seats and stand in the aisles. it looks like a train from, down in Mexico, where all these people come and gather on these trains and ride on the tops and hold on the sides. But it was every day at rush hour. That's what you'd see, commuters coming in, risking their lives by holding on to the outside of this crazy train that's speeding through downtown Colombo. We went to Weligama and other cities along the southwest coast that were hit by the tsunami in 2004 that killed over 35,000 people in Sri Lanka. Can you imagine that? It was such a horrible thing that the scars exist to this day. All you have to do is ask them about it and they'll start talking. We went up in the Central Highlands and to Kandy, which was an old kingdom. Sri Lanka used to be a collection of kingdoms and not just one government. And we saw, ruins and buildings from 2,000 years old, huge giant statue of Buddha hanging over the city, dominating everything. And in Kandy, they have something called the Temple of the Tooth. It's a big, big Buddhist temple, and it's dedicated, well, actually it holds, allegedly, I haven't seen it, neither has anybody else recently, but they claim they've got Buddha's tooth. And so they built a temple to hold it. And they have a big parade called the Perahera, the Asala Perahera, every year. And we went to the parade where this huge crowd shows up, Buddhists and Hindus, surprisingly, in this parade. And it's a wild, wild thing of elephants decorated in lights and regal robes, all kinds of flame sticks being thrown around, stilt walkers. What they have to do with Sri Lankan culture, I've never been able to figure out, but they were there. Bands, the whole thing. It was exotic. We talked to women who are waging a kind of an economic revolution, take control of the finances in their families, which is extraordinary in a male-dominated Buddhist society. And we talked to the Speaker of the Parliament, Karu Jarasariya, who was once threatened by Marxist terrorists threatening to kill him because he was taking a plant that was owned by the government and privatizing it. And he managed to talk them out of killing him. They were supposed to come back the next day. And he hightailed it, got his daughters off to London, but now he's the Speaker of the Parliament. So you can see it's an interesting place with a colorful history. I want to introduce our student panel that's going to talk to you in just a minute. Marley Crawford, Marissa Morissette, Lana Ferguson, Slade Rand, Savannah Smith, Ethel Mawinza-Windera, Ariel Colbert, and Mackenzie Ross. There are some that are not here. Bailey Mojazik is not here, and Ariel Onstadt is not here, and who am I missing? William Kelly from Jackson State University is not here. We'll hear from them later, but first, I want to show you what's going on. And Professor Ji Hoon Heo went with us on the trip and was in charge of all the visuals, and he's going to let you see what was going on before we talk about it. Ji, it's all yours.
So thanks, Bill. It was a challenge to capture everything that Bill pretty much said in visual. So I was in charge of audio. I was in charge. This is not good. I can't show you anything now. But everybody here was involved in either visuals, audio, and we actually brought for the first time a design team. So they have been working really hard to get the magazine so that it could be ready for December, and then hopefully to the public by January. And we also have a website, Ole Miss in Sri Lanka, available right now, and we're going to continue to add things to it. And also we're going to have a multitude of multimedia content, video, audio, and a collection of things.
After the independence, we changed it as Sri Lanka, but we never tried to change that name because everybody knows about the Ceylon tea. Quality-wise, we are the main tea producer. Annually, we are making nearly 275 million kilos. Very hard process. we want to plant, we want to clear the lands, we want to plant the tea. Then within 2.5 years, we can take the harvest. Then we are using some fertilizers and we want to plug the tea leaf. It's a huge job. You know, in the world now completely different, converted the artificial things. Now we have the artificial tea also. But it's not good for the health. But we are not using those new technology for the tea fields. With the new machineries, we can't accept the real characters from the tea. For the Asians, we used to drink very, very strong character tea. We are not getting any feeling with the light character tea because our habit. Unfortunately, that strong tea is the lowest grade, dust. It's very finer tea. Best quality always the particles bigger. It's called leafy tea. The characters are very light, very soft. Our culture depends on the tea. That's why still we are keeping our quality.
So far we have 2 videos done. That first one is just an overview, but we plan to have many, many more. It just takes a long time. But they've really worked hard, every single one of them, to put this together. And this is actually available online already. It's called olemisinsrilanka.com. And in here, we'll have all the stories, right? So struggle for the soul of Sri Lanka, and really fully multimedia content. And we'll continue to add content here as we continue to work on it. And we also have spreads that our design team created. Just to give you a teaser of how it'll look, this is one about food. Don't know what's going on. This is about one of the Gala Fort, which is a Dutch fort with a lot of Portuguese background as well. This is the Speaker of the Parliament, Karu Jayasuriya, I think. And then we also have, obviously, the Perahera Festival. And that was they might tell you a little bit more, and I'll save that for them. But it was an experience, I'll tell you that. So we have all this content which would be available hopefully by December and January. And we'll turn it over for questions and then ask the students what they learned and their experience in Sri Lanka.
So let's start out with just the basic questions that I can ask each of you, because here are all these people and they're wondering, what the heck, if I went to Sri Lanka, what would I do? What would I learn? You know, are these trips worth it? What did you learn, Marley?
Well, can you hear me? Yeah. I learned a lot about video. This is my first time actually shooting video, and I did a lot of it. That tea factory, I wouldn't have known where to start before I went on the trip. So multimedia content was definitely something that I learned.
Okay, great. Practical. Marissa?
I think I was the only non-journalism major on this trip, so I learned a lot.
How did you do that? How did you get in here?
I asked when they let me. But so I kind of wanted to do it to push myself to write more, and so obviously I learned to do that. I learned about audio and, you know, video is something I'd never really done before, and, you know, about a completely new culture.
Okay, Lana?
Okay, I'll definitely agree that we learned a lot about multimedia because I don't touch multimedia normally, and G really pushed me to do at least audio, so I got a good handle on that. I wouldn't quite say the rest yet, but we're working on it. It was an intro. But I definitely learned as a writer adaptability, because like Bill was talking about, we went into a village and we had to have a translator there with us for the interviews. So that was something I'd never experienced before as a writer. So you were having to reword questions because of the language barrier for other interviews as well, if they did know English and stuff. So I think adaptability was probably my biggest learning curve on the trip, and planning my interviews in that way, because you were talking to a lot of different types of people on the trip. So.
Yeah,
Slade.
I totally agree with the adaptability thing, because we were thrown into some, covering some situations like the festival there where it's loud, it's hot, it's crowded and everything, and you feel like you don't know where to begin. So I definitely learned how to, approach those kind of situations and do some actual reporting there when you're so overwhelmed, you can actually find a story. I learned a lot about that.
Okay. Savannah?
I learned that this is exactly what I want to do. And I think that that was something that, I had thought of before, but it's kind of like getting thrown in the deep end, and you're there and you're doing it. And, you're experiencing what these people live and what their world is, and you get to share that with others. And I think that was something that I really took away from it in a really neat way.
Could you hear me? Okay, I definitely learned patience on this trip, because that's something that I didn't have before. But with the language barrier and just being very patient when it comes to asking these questions, and yeah.
I just learned how when you're being a photographer, that's what I did on the trip, just gaining people's trust. You just can't always put a camera in people's face. You just have to make them comfortable. And sometimes it's better to approach a person first, person to person, instead of person to journalist.
I learned a lot about breaking out of my shell and comfort zone. It's completely different interviewing somebody over there than it is here. It definitely was my first reporting trip, so it definitely taught me a lot about video and audio, and never thought I'd do audio, but I got to do it on this trip.
So how hard was it to talk to people over there? Did you have a hard time getting them to talk? Lana?
I think it kind of depended on the person. Once they understood kind of that we were there for good reasons and we had good intentions and we wanted to tell their story, it was good. Some people were a little skeptical at first, but I think, like the Speaker of the Parliament said, they're the land of the smiling people, and everyone greets you with a smile, and they are warm-hearted and very inviting. And we went to a village, and that didn't have much money, and they fed us a feast and stuff, so they're really welcoming. So I think for the most part it wasn't that hard. It was just a matter of communicating well.
Marissa, what surprised you about Sri Lanka?
I guess that kind of with the language barrier, you kind of don't expect, you're both speaking English, but it's not the same English, if that makes sense. So you have to choose your words so carefully so that what you're actually intending to ask them, they'll answer. I guess, I don't know, I guess that's the most surprising thing.
That's pretty good. How easy or hard was it to get around over there, Ariel?
The tuk-tuks, never getting the tuk-tuk in Sri Lanka, because
Explain what a tuk-tuk.
A tuk-tuk is this high-powered motorized scooter with a cart hooked to the back of it, and they're about this big, about me and Ethel, probably half, right here, and you get in them and they're just squeezing in between lanes, and you think you're gonna die at least 10 times throughout the trip. Never getting the tuk-tuk.
How about getting around the countryside?
Yeah, that was difficult. Yeah. Because I think someone we were talking to, one of the tour guides said they only had, 2 highways on 2 very specific parts of the island, from the airport to Colombo and then from somewhere else. And so if you need to get anywhere else, getting up into the highlands, getting up into Kandy, you're on these mountain roads, and we're in a van, which is way too big to be up there, with the tuk-tuks as well, swarming around you, other trucks coming the other way, then squeezing between. Everyone's kind of on their own out there, I guess.
Savannah, what was the hardest thing about this?
I think kind of like what Mackenzie said, I think it was really far out of my comfort zone, but it was such a special group, and I think it was, just really far out of the comfort zone. And there was one place that we stayed in Kandy, and there were stickers up on the windows that said that monkeys could come into your room. And so, you know what I mean? That was just something that I'd never seen before, and I think that it was just, I think realizing that you or any of us here or any of you could do something like this. So I think that was hard, but that was a good thing that happened because of it.
Ethel, what was the hardest thing for you?
Oh my gosh.
It was all easy.
No, it wasn't. Maybe, I guess learning just audio and miking people up. Kind of was kind of awkward sometimes, but I would say just audio and interviews and stuff.
Now, Bailey, you had an interesting assignment. You had to write about food.
Oh, me? Okay.
What did I say, Bailey? I didn't. Sorry, Mackenzie, Bailey. They sound so much alike.
With food, it was difficult because we were staying in more places that had or catered towards Americans, and I think that it was kind of picky where we had to eat because you didn't know if the food was cooked properly, and we didn't want to get sick, but also wanted to get a really good story. So it was hard, but I think towards the end of the trip, we had the chance to try some more Sri Lankan food, and it was hard in finding people, but it was fun.
And Lana, you did a wildlife story.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about their wildlife.
So the wildlife is literally everywhere. Like we said with the monkeys, a monkey almost made it in our room at one point. So it's like monkeys are literally like climbing all over your hotel rooms and the hallways, everywhere. But we saw more wildlife as in how they embrace like elephants and whatnot, like when the Parahera, when they dress them up and whatnot, like they take it very seriously. They're very proud that they have such great biodiversity on this tiny island. I think they said like 90% of the species like are native to there. So once it's gone, if it's endangered there, it's gone. So they take a lot of pride in that, and I think it was cool. We talked to like a zoologist and whatnot, and he talked about they have whales and they have monkeys and they have sloth bears and they have the elephants and the cheetahs and leopards. He's like, we have something for everyone. Just pick a park, I'll tell you what's in it. So we didn't get to the chance to make it to a national park. We were doing a lot of interviews, but from research I did beforehand, they take a lot of pride and they have a lot of the land reserved for the wildlife. So they love it. But.
So how about the elephants? They prize the elephants, but are they having a problem with poaching or people killing elephants?
Poaching isn't as bad in Asia as it is in Africa, just because of they poach for ivory, which is in the tusks, and I think it's the females that don't have the tusks there, so it's not as bad as in Africa, but it still is an issue. But I think, I wasn't gonna go there, but we went to a place and they had the elephants chained up and you could ride the elephants and like wash them and stuff, which is a total tourist trap in my opinion, but it's how they make money. But yeah, I think as far as elephants, poaching is as much of the issue as like the tensions over, like when we went to the church, the temple, they had the elephants there, and because of the Parahera, there was like 20, 30 elephants there chained up. And so a lot of them are really excited to see these elephants and think it's so important to the Buddhist culture. But then there's a lot of opposition to that right now. So although they love their animals, they might treat them differently than how we see is fit. So.
What do?
I don't think it's bad. They just chaining up the elephants, I think was the biggest thing. It was kind of surprising for me because I had gone on the Africa trip through the journalism school before, and we spent the whole like 2 weeks in a wildlife reserve. So like these elephants were all over the place, and then all the ones we saw were chained up. But I think it was just a cultural thing for sure.
I was a little worried about these elephants when we were there at the parade, and there are thousands of people all along the streets. I mean, right on the streets, and these enormous elephants, bloom, 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 are coming right by. And none of them ever decided to head for us, which was good.
They're mellow. They're used to it.
Which was good. So, Marissa, you wrote about the plant life there. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, just like the animals, Sri Lanka has a lot of biodiversity, especially for how small the island is. And, one thing we were concerned about is like, well, how concerned are you with, preserving everything? And one thing that I found is, they are really concerned with, preserving their forests, and, their constitution has language in it and they've passed legislation, and the people of Sri Lanka seem very aware of their actions, and they've done a really good job of preserving what they can. And so it does look like, they'll be okay. But, if things die, they die. And there's a lot of, species that are only on that island.
And nowhere else in the world.
Nowhere else, yeah.
Marley, what was the hardest thing for you to do there?
Probably just not having enough planning we were kind of thrown into some things, and I was having to think about how to best show things visually. All I did there was photography, video, audio, that kind of thing. And so we were just kind of pressed for time in some ways and just moving all around. But it was actually a really good learning experience to be thrown out there and just try to do it. So.
Yeah. Slade, tell me about the speaker.
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to, you know, be assigned writing the profile about the Speaker of Parliament there, who was, I mean, the words he says and the ideas he talks about are such huge concepts, you know, that are so weird to think about, you know, like bringing democracy to a country. It's something unfathomable, you know, and but he was so calm and cool about basically everything, and one of the stories that I found so interesting from him, he talked about how when he led his first campaign to be the mayor of Colombo, as campaigns and everything were becoming more and more westernized and flashy with signs, and he kept mentioning polyester or polyurethane cutouts, and he chose to not use any campaign signs, not use any, you know, commercials on television or anything during his campaign. He only had 2 signs made for when he announced his candidacy. He wanted with overwhelming support in Colombo, which kind of just shows the new energy that he tapped into in the country there, because, you know, there's a generation of voters who grew up in a civil war, and he has somehow found a way to unite these horribly, violently divided people.
And so he's got this parliament. Is the parliament a bunch of real pushovers? Are they real cooperative, or?
They're the least cooperative. I don't know if the word would describe that, but yeah, I mean, we looked up videos of them, you know, parliament members fighting in Parliament, swinging punches, getting thrown out, having to call sessions over. And he said he'd never thrown a punch, but you know, he presides so calmly and so well-mannered over this raucous group of people, you know, and they're still representing constituencies that hate other constituencies in the same country. And so the fact that he's able to stay so calm amid all that and amidst all the death threats and amidst, you know, his daughter suffering from cancer, you know, he's really a special guy.
So, Ethel, you had, I'm sorry, my cell phone keeps going off here. Somebody's very insistently trying to call me. You had the history story, and you traced the history of Sri Lanka, and so for that reason, I'm wondering, can you tell us why this enmity, why this, what led to this civil war between, what was behind the antagonism between the two groups?
So Sri Lanka got their independence in 1948 from the British, and then after that, the Tamil Tigers and these two groups were fighting over just religion and just ethnic. There was just like ethnic tensions in the country, but.
And the Tamils were which religion?
Buddhist.
The Tamils were. Tamils were Hindus,
Were Hindu,
right?
sorry, and the other ones were Buddhist.
Sinhalese were Buddhists. So why were they mad at each other? I mean, why did the Sinhalese want to fight with the Tamils?
It was just that one religion was superior than the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah. It's an interesting history on that island. The British did something they loved to do. They divide and conquered. They brought in Tamils from India and gave them all the high-paying clerical jobs, the white-collar jobs, and cut out the Sinhalese, the Buddhists. And the Buddhists never forgot it. So when they declared independence, it took the Buddhists, who were in a vast majority all of a sudden, only about 2 or 3 years to pass a new constitution that enshrined them in every possible way and cut out the Sinhalese. And that cut out the Tamils, and that made the Tamils so mad that they began to fight back, and it eventually led to a civil war between the two. And it lasted for 30 years, if you can imagine that. Finally, the pseudo-dictator of the island declared that he was taking his handcuffs off of the military, and they just went into the north part of the country where the Tamils live and just killed everybody they saw. They didn't care whether they were military, civilian, or what, till finally they got them in one little tiny corner of the island, and they gave civilians like about 8 hours to get out, and then they went in and annihilated everybody. And that ended that Civil War. But did y'all pick up any tensions while you were there? Slade?
Definitely from the older generation there. You know, speaking with them, they just have, the way they talk about the northern part of the country, you know, it sounds like the way, you know, that nationalists here, you know, speak about our neighboring countries, and nationalists in Europe speak about their neighboring countries, where they'll describe, you know, this whole group of people as, you know, bad workers and, you know, intrusive. But that's from the older people. And then the younger generation who, you know, if you're 30 years old in Sri Lanka, you grew up entirely during this civil war. And they have a much different understanding. They're not afraid to really, I mean, they'll talk with one another, but a lot of them just haven't ever met anyone not like them. You know, the young Singhalese people there, you know, really only know the Singhalese people, but it doesn't seem like they're, you know, there's any animosity there. They're afraid of meeting people from the north. They just grew up in a time where it was natural to be segregated like that.
So Savannah, you did the tsunami story, right? What were the survivors like when you talked to them? I mean, were they willing to talk? Did they remember what happened? Tell me about that.
So we went to Weligama and talked to surfers that actually worked on the beach right there, and we talked to a few other people that, I mean, pretty much everybody that we talked to was affected by the tsunami in some shape, form, or fashion, but we talked to some surfers there that were actually, I guess they were around their early 20s, so they were 9 and 11 years old when this happened, and a few of them were on the actual beach the day that it happened. And one of the guys that I talked to had a best friend who that morning had, it was the day after Christmas, so it's Boxing Day, so it's a holiday for them. So one of his friends, they were out of school that day, so one of his friends was out at sea and he lost him, and he still has a tattoo of his name on his arm. Another one of the survivors that I talked to was actually in the wave and had to hold on to a tree until his parents could come and get him, and he was 9 years old. And so it was just unreal to see that in their eyes. And then it was really neat to see that they are still working with this water every single day, and that they're not afraid of it, but that they still have dreams sometimes that the wave is coming and that it's there. And it was just, it really humanized something that I'd seen on TV before or heard about. And they were incredible.
Ariel, was there one image that affected you more than any other?
I would have to say it would be the image when I was in the tea factory. It was like a little bit outside of Kandy, like the workers walk around barefoot. And there was an instance where you could see like tea in the cracks of her foot, and it just shows how their long hours and how hard they work at the tea factory. Another image would be that boat one. I was so scared to fly that drone. Like G can tell you about it, because like drones are really expensive. So I don't know what I'm doing. So like if I drop this drone, but yeah.
Drones can fly really high, can't they?
Yeah, especially over the Indian Ocean.
I was impressed. Marley, was there an image that captivated you?
Probably one from the festival, because just all the colors and the lights and all the small kids just handling fire was a lot to handle. But.
Okay. And who went inside the temple of the two? What was that? What was it like in there?
It was insane, solely because Parahera was going on, so there were so many people. People flocked from all over the world to go to here. And they had separate places for locals to put their shoes and for foreigners to put their shoes. So like we were definitely isolated. But once we kind of got in with the wave of people, it was just like overwhelming to see. how powerful it is for them to go there, and Buddha's tooth was in like a case, and so they saw that, and people were praying in every corner. There were people in the stairs, there were people in like right up next to the case, in the back, on the walls, like anywhere they could find, they were sitting and they're praying. And so I think it was overwhelming for me just because of the amount of people there. But when you were able to stand there for a second and look around and just see how important this was for them, it kind of hit home, and it was a really cool experience just to sift through. I think it'd be even cooler if you could go back when it was a little less crowded and really take it all in. But yeah, the temples, they're beautiful, and you had all the elephants outside of it. People were outside, and just like it was a time for them to really just sit together and I guess celebrate Perahera and just really take it all in for that weekend. So that was really cool. But Marley went too, I think, right?
Yeah, it was really cool to be like really immersed in their culture. We had to take our shoes off and just kind of blend in, but we don't look like them, so it was interesting.
Okay. Slade, you did a story on tourism.
Yes.
It would strike me that this kind of island might draw tourists, but how are they doing?
They're doing way better than they had, you know, I mean, when you have a tsunami, it's kind of difficult to attract people when, you know, that's the only image. The first time I'd heard of the country was, you know, when the tsunami had happened, and I imagine that was a lot of people around the world. And especially coming off the Civil War, you know, the numbers tell exactly what you'd think they'd tell, that tourism was down. You know, it had small rises every year, but it was really low numbers of, you know, less than 1 million visitors a year sometimes during the Civil War. But in the last decade or so, a couple, you know, really strong individuals in the corporate world have stepped up and, you know, united this entire country to the point where you walk down the street, you can talk to anybody, and they love asking where you're from, what are you doing, would you like me to do anything, how can I make your stay here better? And at first I felt I was gonna have a hard time covering this story, because like, who am I gonna talk to that's gonna be an expert on tourism? It's such a broad thing, but everywhere we went, everyone loved to talk about their favorite thing that they would love to show. You know, oh, what are you doing tomorrow? Can I take you on this tour? It was really, really neat seeing how committed they actually were to this kind of abstract idea of tourism.
Good. So Bailey's not here, but so Lana, you get nominated.
Okay.
The women in these small villages, this is a very male-dominated culture. What's going on there?
Yeah, so Bailey did most of those interviews, but I got to do one with one of the women leaders in the village. And so basically in this religion, like, it's very male-oriented. The males take the lead. But the issue was the males were spending a lot of money and time on tobacco and like alcohol when the women were left at home to clean and cook and take care of the families. The money was low because all the money was going towards the husband's spending and whatnot, and like the kids' educations were suffering and whatnot. So the women just finally decided it was a nonprofit organization, to bond together and tell the men, like, hey, this is what's gonna happen. One story she told me was they kind of like put like a jar in there, and she was like, every time you want to buy alcohol or tobacco, put it in there. And then like it started to create a visual for the husbands as like, hey, maybe my wife has the right idea. And so like overnight, like they were, not overnight, but in less than a year, I think they turned like basically lent in their pockets into millions of rupees, which is a lot of money for them in this small village. They transformed it. She was so happy to brag about how well her children were doing in school. They have food to put on the tables. They're not worried about the coming days anymore because they're more stable. So these women literally just took the chance, stepped up, and they kept, like, every one of them said, like, we did it together, we did it together, we did it together. So that was the thing, women supporting women there, and eventually it turned around and they were able to support their whole community. And they kind of serve as like an example for what all of Sri Lanka can do. I talked about that in the story a little bit. But yeah, it was amazing to see, like, once they stood up for themselves, the men kind of got it afterwards.
Woman power.
Women power.
Good. I wonder if there are questions from anybody in the audience. We have some time. Yes, ma'am.
How long were y'all in Sri Lanka?
2 weeks.
What is it, 11 days?
It was like 10 days, but then it was like 30 hours traveling there, 30 hours traveling back. So it was a short amount of time, like a week more, I think, of reporting.
Yeah. It's like a week on the ground and then 4 days of the most arduous travel you've ever heard of, you know, in airplanes that were cramped, and I don't want to go into it.
Yeah.
It was brutal. It was terrible. Who else? Yeah.
How are your stories assigned? Like, did you just pick something that appealed to you, or did you
I assigned them. Actually, we had a conversation about it. Some people had preferences, but generally it came down to the Mino professors assigning it, just like an assignment editor at a magazine would assign something. Anybody else? Yeah.
how was everyone chosen to get to go?
I believe they applied. Word got out, and people came forward and signed up. But that's a good question, because you too can go on trips with the Meek School to exotic lands, right, Dr. Mitchell?
Yeah.
He's nodding very slowly. It may cost you a little money. You may have to pay part of the cost. But it is well worth it, and it's an essential part of education. If you're really going to do this, if you really want to learn something, this is the way to do it. You stay on the alert for these things, sign up for them, find out what's involved, and get involved. You've got to do your classwork to get the groundwork laid for that. But once you do, it's a great experience to put out a magazine like this, to put out a video product like this, and a website. Man, that's an education all to itself. Yes, Will.
Question for the people who went to the Temple of the Tooth. Were there any difficulties interacting with the Buddhist monks there? Are they a sect of Buddhism where the monks take a vow of silence, or they were?
I don't think
They weren't.
No, I didn't get to interact with many. It was a ton of people there, and like I remember you're supposed to wear like all white, and we didn't know that till like the night before, and obviously I did not pack that, and you can't go to Walmart down the street, so we made do. And so, but yeah, we didn't get to interact. It was mainly a lot of tourists and like locals, instead of just the monks in the temple. But it was a cool experience.
Yeah, just don't wear a scarf on your head, because I had a scarf on my hair because I had like braids, and they thought I was Muslim, and they weren't gonna let me in. So just like, don't wear a scarf on your head.
There was a few who was doing moment of silences, and funny story, I was looking for Marley and Ariel, and they were inside the temple, and you can't wear your shoe or like anywhere near the thing, and I had taken off my shoe and then I put it back on, and I stepped on this stone plate, and I got a beating from this guy. I mean, not literally, but he scolded me all the way, and he kept giving me the dirtiest look, and he shooed me away like this, like, go, and I'd be like, okay, and I walk, and he'd look at me again. I look at him, and then I'd move a little farther. So it was, that was my fault though. But there were monks from Korea, from all Asian countries, and not just Asian, but all over the world, to pay respects to the tooth, or
tooth,
supposedly a tooth there.
Right. Nobody ever sees the tooth, but it's there. It's there. You had a question at one point.
Okay, so with all like the biodiversity and stuff like that, how was like their sustainability and like their littering? Like, how did they take care of their environment, even like within the cities and stuff like that? Like, did they have an emphasis on like recycling or like just caring for their environment? Like, was that a common thing throughout all the people, or was that just some people were like that, or how was that?
Well, I didn't see as many, like, you see like recycling bins here. I didn't see as much of that, but we did speak to a teacher there, and he did say that, a lot of the restaurants, they're very conscious of the waste that they're creating. So I'm sure there's a lot of like behind the scenes stuff that we just didn't see. But yeah, this teacher, he talked about, they're aware of that, and like they do things to help.
And Colombo is a relatively clean city for how densely populated and dated a lot of the technology is there and stuff. You weren't seeing huge overflowing dumpsters with rats and stuff crawling out of them. It was relatively clean, other than like typical city trash you would see. But it seemed like everyone was pretty aware of the because they all they refer to their own country as the Garden of Eden, so they take pretty good care of it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Yes.
So, with having the opportunity to go and tell these types of stories that we don't really get to, I guess, come in contact with here in the United States or in the South, how did it kind of change your view on storytelling, like your role as journalists, writers?
There's nothing like traveling 1,000 miles away and getting a glimpse into a different reality and just like wandering the streets. Like even when I was on the Africa trip last year with Lana and this trip now, it's just like such a surreal feeling. Like you just have to take it all in. Cause there were like some mornings I kind of worried, gee, I'll be up at like 6 o'clock in the morning, like roaming the streets, just like meeting people and taking in the ambiance of the cities. It's just like you just got to take it in, hit the ground running.
I think it's a bigger responsibility too, because like sometimes they would misspeak or feel like the translator wasn't quite doing it quite right. So you have a bigger responsibility to make sure like you understand what they're really trying to say so that you're conveying it right, because that's your job as a journalist, is to make sure you're telling the real story. So I think that was probably my biggest thing, was to make sure we were getting it right, because I mean honestly, I heard Sri Lanka trip was happening, Googled it, I didn't know where it was. Congrats to y'all that did. Good job. But I was like, oh, this looks awesome. Like, and I always want to travel. I think I want international reporting. So this was a realization for me that you really need to take the people into consideration and make sure you're doing it right for them.
Let me follow up on that just a minute, because is having gone on this trip going to give you a little broader, a better perspective when you're writing other stories in the future back here? Savannah, I see you nodding.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that you get out of your comfort zone and your box that you live in, and you get a chance to get a glimpse, just like she said, at somebody's whole world. I mean, it really is just like it feels like a different world. And so, I don't know, just like Lana said, like you take the responsibility of it's your responsibility to tell the truth and tell their stories, and it absolutely did.
Okay, we've run out of time, but I want to. Was there another question? Yeah. Go ahead.
One of the things you all mentioned was the fact that once you went on the trip, your pretty much your intentionality changed. Like you learned how to talk to the person more about who they are and really tell them a true story. So if you had not gone on this trip, do you think that your intentionality with your interest here in America was still like, of course it wouldn't be the same, but what way do you think you could like amp it up even more?
Like, without traveling abroad, how would we, amp up our intentionality?
Like, okay, so you went abroad, of course, and so now that you have this perspective of interviewing people and being intentional across seas, how do you plan on being intentional at home?
Gotcha.
This trip let us realize, like working with Ethel this summer, there's a huge Sri Lankan community on our campus now. And that's just something I didn't even know existed until like this summer before the trip. We were working on interviews and like photographing and talking to people. Just little things like that.
I think empathy too is another part of it, that like even if you can't completely understand somebody, when you can empathize with them, that goes a long way, and I think that that's a powerful thing to take into reporting anywhere in the world.
And some of the overarching stories were entirely different things than we would encounter here. People reeling from a tsunami isn't something you encounter in Mississippi really, but so many of the details someone could have said a quote over here that would mean the same thing almost. It was interesting seeing how people notice the same things in their life there as we do here. That makes sense. They deal with the same struggles, same things affect them.
And I think also realizing that sometimes stories take more than just an interview, because like going there, especially like to be able to fully understand it, you had to try the food, you had to look at everything, you had to know the history, you had to know so many different aspects. And so even like if you did a story for like the DM here, maybe instead of sitting down for half an hour with someone on an interview, actually like trying to get to know them more casually and stuff like that, I think is a big thing to get to know. So, good question though.
All right, I want to thank our panel. Because they did an excellent job, and you're going to be really impressed with this magazine, as you will be impressed with these videos and the website. Be sure to take a look at it, because it's going to be worth reading. I've been on a number of trips at the school, and while this one was the most arduous, the people were probably the most professional under some, sometimes adverse circumstances. And I want to thank you for it. And I want to thank the audience for excellent questions. So we've gone over a little bit, and this concludes our program. Thank you very much.